Already representing a quarter of the total votes in the 2020 cycle, 40 million ballots have been cast all around the nation. Republicans are overperforming expectations, as registered Republicans vote early or return mail-in ballots at an unusually high rate, you have most likely heard. Based on these figures, let us explore the data and create an electoral college map for 2024 to evaluate whether Democrats have cause for worry at this point. Tracking mail-in and early in-person voting across most states is a fantastic tool available from NBC News. At the time of this recording, registered Republicans cast 40% of the ballots, registered Democrats cast 42%, and independents, or third-party voters, cast 18%. Early on, Democrats clearly have a small edge. Historically, they prefer mail-in and early in-person voting. Republicans often show up more on Election Day itself. Having said that, the real surprise is how small the gap is. Hence, instead of basing our estimates on these figures at face value, we will probe demographic trends, polling data, and prediction markets to better understand possible outcomes. Let us start now. First, NBC News does not have early voting data for the 4 states, Missouri, Kentucky, Mississippi, and Alabama, which are already clearly marked as solid Republicans on this map since the states have not reported any results. Each of these states, however, voted for Donald Trump by at least 15 points in 2020. Once all the votes are tallied, there is no reason to doubt they will support him by a great margin once more. I'll skip a thorough examination of every safe state for every candidate to keep things moving. Early vote results point to Republicans dominating in the following states as expected for former President Trump: Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, and Alaska. Along with the 1st and 3rd districts, Kansas and Oklahoma, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, statewide, are found over the Great Plains. While in Appalachia, West Virginia, and Indiana round out the list, in the South, Arkansas, Louisiana, Tennessee, and South Carolina are displaying their typically strong Republican support. Not voting Democratic since at least 2008, each of these states backed Trump by notable margins in 2020. Early voting figures already show Republicans are already leaping out to major advantages in every single one of these states, leading by margins of roughly 15 to 40 points. Their combined count as 125 electoral votes. Remember, the magic number required to guard the White House is 270. Regarding Kamala Harris, Democrats also hold strong early leads in several deep blue states. We have Washington, Oregon, California, and Hawaii down the Pacific coast. Illinois is the only solidly blue non-coastal state eastward. The rest of these Democratic strongholds are in the Northeast: New York, Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. Joe Biden carried all these states by at least 15 points in 2020, and none have voted Republican since 1988, 8 cycles ago. And once more, Democrats are expectedly leading here by rather very large margins in the early vote. With 180 electoral votes, they together propel Kamala Harris ahead of Trump now. That leaves 17 more competitive states to now examine more closely. First, let's start with Nevada, where the early vote totals have attracted more interest than any other state this cycle. Usually at this point, we would be talking about the Democratic firewall here, and whether Republicans could close the Election Day divide. With almost 600,000 ballots already cast, almost half the total expected vote, Republicans are currently outnumbering Democrats by 6 percentage points. Arguably, this early campaign data point for Kamala Harris raises serious concerns. With 1.3 million votes, Nevada's last early vote total in 2020 favored Democrats by 4 points, so enabling Biden to hold Nevada in the Democratic column by 2.4%. Nevada has, nevertheless, shown a slow Republican turn in line with national trends. Clinton gained Nevada by the same 2.4% margin in 2016, although with a smaller national popular vote margin. Republicans also seized on this trend by turning the governor's office upside down in 2022. Based on 43 polls in the Decision Desk HQ polling average, current polling shows Trump trailing Harris by 0.9%. Democrats just have to start chipping away at this Republican early vote advantage in the next week in a race as close as this. Else we might see Trump overperforming not only in Nevada, but possibly in other battlegrounds as well. Right now, Nevada falls in the tilt Republican column. Trump is the minor favorite here. Turning now to Arizona, still another fiercely competitive race in the Southwest. With Biden carrying it by just 0.3%, Arizona ranked second closest state by margin in 2020. The fast expansion and diversification of Maricopa County, which includes the Phoenix metro area, helps to explain his success. High turnout among Hispanic and college-educated voters ever so gently turned the county and hence the state at large into the Democratic column. Now, early vote numbers show Republicans are on track for a strong showing here again, leading Democrats by 6 points among the 1.2 million mail-in and early in-person votes cast, currently at 42% Republican to 36% Democrat. Out of the 2.8 million early ballots returned, Republicans led Democrats by only 3 points, 38% to 35%. Comparing this to the 2020 election, we find Republicans overperforming that number by 3 points. Given Biden's meager 0.3% margin of victory in 2020, any Democratic slippage in Arizona could prove lethal for the party. Based on 59 polls, Trump currently leads Harris by 1.9%, so supporting this trend as well. Especially Arizona has been the one central battleground state where Trump has regularly polled even with or ahead of Harris dropped from the ballot. We will thus classify Arizona as a tilt Republican, alongside Nevada. Trump is preferred to carry both states, barring significant increase in Democratic early voter turnout. Then come Colorado and New Mexico. While he only carried New Mexico by 11%, thus in terms of the early vote here so far, Democrats outnumber Republicans by 12 points in New Mexico right now. 2020 notably marked the first time in over 50 years that Colorado voted to the left of New Mexico, as it trended hard to the left to favor Joe Biden by almost 14 points. Note here that historically Colorado's independence, which explains the plurality of votes cast thus far, is quite left-leaning. Once more, Biden prevailed by 13.5%. Back in 2020, the early vote indicated Democrats also only had a 2-point advantage over Republicans, with 40% of those ballots returned by independents. Returning to our electoral map, now I am going to mark both states in the safe blue column, since Democrats are expected to match their 2020 margins. Completing the Southwest with Texas, the second biggest electoral prize on the map, valued 40 votes. Texas has already seen more than any other state with just the first few days of early voting. Over 4 million ballots cast. With 54% to 36% over Democrats, Republicans presently lead 18 points in the early vote. With over 9.5 million ballots cast, the early and absentee vote leaned Republican by 17 points in 2020, when Trump won Texas by 5.6%, the narrowest Republican margin in Texas this century. Given Republicans are up about a point here, the early 2024 figures we are seeing here seem to fairly closely reflect 4 years ago. Based on 18 polls, Trump likewise leads by 6.6% over Harris in the poll average, relative to the 2020 margin, a 1-point overperformance as well. Furthermore, given Hispanic voters' ongoing Republican trend, it is more likely that Democrats reach their ceiling in Texas in 2020 and might find it difficult to raise on that performance this cycle. These elements will thus help us to classify Texas as most likely Republican. Now, Divine, moving to the southeast here in Florida, another state where the first few days of early voting have yielded a sizable total of almost 4 million ballots returned. Leading here also by a 9-point margin, Republicans account for 44% of the votes cast thus far, relative to Democrats' 35%. For Kamala Harris, this represents still another alarming statistic. Democrats led the final early vote tally, totaling more than 9 million by 1 point, as back in 2020 when Trump carried Florida by 3.5 points. Over the past few years, the Florida Democratic Party has had just a terrible time here. Since 2020, Republicans have registered far more voters. Over the past few cycles, the state has followed trend as hard to the right as any other state. Recall back in 2022, Republicans witnessed a localized red wave here as Florida re-elected Senator Marco Rubio and Governor Ron DeSantis by landslide margins of more than 15 percentage points apiece. The poll also indicates Trump might win Florida by the biggest margin for a presidential candidate in decades in 2024. Reversing direction on our map, Florida falls into the probably Republican category alongside Texas. Georgia comes next, the closest state in 2020 where Joe Biden turned the peach state blue for the first time in 30 years, winning by a barely perceptible 0.2%. Like Arizona, Biden's triumph could be ascribed to the fast expansion and diversification of Atlanta, the state's largest population center, where record black voter turnout tipped the state ever so slightly in Biden's direction. The possibility for radical racial depolarization, black and Hispanic voters leaning toward Trump, is one of the narratives of this election cycle. Polling crosstabs between October 16th and 31st shows that, compared to 2020, Trump is up by over 20 points on average among black voters, a change that might especially harm Democratic prospects in Georgia. The general numbers also show this trend since the latest polling average shows Trump slightly favored, which leads Harris by 1.3%, depending on 55 polls in the Decision Desk HQ average. Regarding early voting, Georgia is once more seeing a record number of ballots cast early. Early voting exceeds halfway to the overall 2020 turnout. Early or by mail, about 2.8 million ballots have been cast thus. Republicans lead by 4 points, 49% to 45%. Fascinatingly, given 4 million ballots, Republicans exceeded Democrats by 8 points in early voting, indicating a rather positive trend for Democrats returning in 2020. The Harris campaign will take the positive indicators where they can find them at this point, even if Democratic numbers are most likely still distorted due to the overrepresentation of mail-in ballots, which typically are cast first, and lean far more Democratic. While we keep an eye on these figures over the next week, Georgia will remain in the tilt Republican category on our map for now. Worth 16 electoral votes, and another key battleground, Democrats must build a strong early voting lead now, as rural Republican-dominated areas are expected to swing hard for Trump on Election Day. Moving up the southeast coast to North Carolina. So far, though, among the 2.5 million ballots cast thus far, Democrats are once more behind trailing Republicans by 2 points. Court decisions on RFK status on the ballots have complicated early voting in North Carolina. Naturally, the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, which momentarily closed some early voting locations, has added more difficulty. Still, the 2.5 million vote sample size offers insightful analysis. Among almost 4.5 million ballots, Democrats erected a firewall of 5 points over Republicans headed into Election Day in 2020. Trump eventually won the state by more than a point. Again, in a state where high turnout is necessary to remain competitive, Democrats are now performing below their 2020 figures. Based on average of 59 polls, Trump leads Harris by 1.5% right now. Hence, North Carolina will follow other Sunbelt states in the tilt Republican category on our map. With former President Trump leading in the race to 270 electoral votes, 244 over Kamala Harris's 195, we have 9 states to go now. Turning now to the Midwest, first considering Tim Walz's home state of Minnesota as Harris's running mate. Joe Biden carried Minnesota by a 7-point margin in 2020. Democrats led the early vote by 13%. Democrats lead Republicans by 22 points today with almost 1 million ballots returned. Early in-person ballots have replaced the first waves of mail-in votes, thus this lead has somewhat closed over the past few days. Still, on our electoral map, Minnesota will fit rather nicely in the likely category for Harris and Walz. Turning now to Iowa and Ohio, these 2 states rank among the fastest right-trending ones in the nation. Both supported Barack Obama in 2008 and once more in 2012. Before Donald Trump won them by at least 8 points in both 2016 and 2020. With 300,000 ballots returned, Democrats have a 4-point advantage over Republicans in Iowa as of right now. Compared to 2020, when Democrats led early voting by 12 points before Election Day changed the state to an 8-point win for Trump, this is yet another notable underperformance for them. Actually, Republicans are underperforming somewhat over in Ohio. They lead Democrats among the 2.3 million ballots returned thus far. But this is a 1-point decline from the 10-point early vote lead Republicans had in 2020 among the 3.3 million early ballots cast. Although Republicans still have time to expand on this margin, there is also some evidence that Democratic losses in Ohio and more general Appalachia may be slowing. Based on an average of 14 polls, Trump leads Harris by roughly 6 points in Ohio. Democrats observed small increases in suburban areas in the midterm elections. Especially, every one of the last 7 polls reveals Trump somewhat below his 8-point margin of expectation for 2020. Thus, on our map, Ohio stays in the likely Republican category for now, while Iowa moves into the safe Republican column. Let us now concentrate on the core Upper Rust Belt trio, the WIMPA states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, which will once more be vital in this race. Since 1988, these states have voted together in every election, supporting Democrats every time until they virtually turned to Trump in 2016 by less than a point, so providing the required votes to reach 270. But in 2020, they all turned back to Biden, so guaranteeing his route to the presidency. Now, once more, for the 2024 contest, winning at least one of these states determines both candidates' routes to 270 most certainly. Kamala Harris might possibly need all 3. Harris could reach 270 electoral votes, with a perfect sweep of the Rust Belt states, even if Trump were to sweep the 4 Sun Belt battlefields, as he does here. Starting in Wisconsin, demographically and fundamentally, this trio of upper Midwest states is most Republican-leaning. In past cycles, Wisconsin has regularly voted to the right of Michigan and Pennsylvania. Its more rural population makes it particularly sensitive to Trump's power among white working-class voters. Trump notably exceeded the final polling averages here by more than 6.5 points in both 2016 and 2020. Based on 67 polls, Trump now has a meager lead of 0.4% over Harris in the 2024 polling average, although Biden led by over 8 points in 2020 and Clinton trailed by about 6 points. Regarding early voting, the first mail-in ballots gave Democrats a head start, but as early in-person voting has continued and over 800,000 ballots have been tallied, the advantage has closed. By 12 points, Democrats lead Republicans. This margin keeps daily shrinking. By 8 points in the almost 2 million votes cast before Election Day in 2020, Republicans exceeded Democrats. It's just a matter of waiting to see whether Republicans can surpass Democrats in early voting, and subsequently by what margin. Based on present poly-market betting estimates, Trump has a 57% chance of winning Wisconsin. Thus, I generally agree with public opinion. For those who have been tracking, even with Harris leading earlier in the cycle, for now, therefore, Wisconsin is shown on our map in the tilt Republican category. In Michigan, where I have generally been more hopeful for Harris than the public, things are different. Having supported Biden by almost 3 points in 2020, Michigan is essentially the bluest of the 3 WIMPA states. Democrats have shown great performance in down-ballot contests since then. Based on their 64 poll average, the newest polling average,
Donald Trump's anger and grievance have reached an all-time high, or rather, a new rock bottom. Today, in a speech in Georgia, Donald Trump completely lost control during an insane meltdown in which he started threatening Michelle Obama. Yes, this is the point where Donald Trump has gotten to. His attacks were disgusting and disgraceful, showing that he is completely coming apart in the final days of this campaign. It was an absolute meltdown, and we are going to get into all of it. But before we do, if I could quickly ask you to leave a like on this video. If you enjoy our channel and want to support it, hit that subscribe button. It goes a long way and really means the world to me. Now, let's dive into the beginning of this meltdown before we see Donald Trump fully lose it with his threats against Michelle Obama.
From Kamala and her campaign is that everyone who isn't voting for her is a Nazi. We're Nazis. You know, years ago, my father, I had a great father, he's a tough guy. He used to always say, never use the word Nazi, never use that word. And he'd say, never use the word Hitler. Don't use that word. It's like, I didn't even know why. Don't use that word. And then I understood it. And yet they use that word freely, both words. They use it, he's Hitler. And then they say, he's a Nazi. I'm not a Nazi. I'm the opposite of a Nazi. I don't know.
If you have to say that you are the opposite of a Nazi, what does that say about you? If you have to deny that accusation, one that clearly highlights Donald Trump and his fascistic tendencies, then where does that leave you? This is the closing message of Donald Trump's campaign at this point. Kamala Harris's message is one of joy and moving forward with policies, while Donald Trump is busy denying that he's a Nazi as he goes through his enemy list. And, of course, we're going to get to that in a bit. But right at the top of that list is Kamala Harris. Donald Trump was really upset with her at this rally, and we can see that right here.
You're going to say, please say it, sir. I say, I will. Kamala, you're fired. Get out of here. Get out of here. Yeah. No.
What crime is it that Donald Trump wants to lock up Kamala Harris for? Where are we? We are at the point again where the only crime Kamala Harris has committed in Donald Trump's eyes is being his political opponent, not his political enemy. We don't need to use that charged language. She is his opponent in a free and fair election in our democracy. That is the crime Donald Trump believes Kamala Harris has committed. And that is the mindset he would carry into the Oval Office. That should absolutely terrify us. This mindset, combined with Donald Trump's cognitive decline, is exactly what Michelle Obama slammed him for this weekend. So before we get into what Trump had to say about her, and trust me, it will shock you, I think we need to hear what Michelle Obama accurately said about Donald Trump.
And I'm talking to everybody out there, that too many of us are still confused and buying into the lies and distortions from people who do not have our best interest at heart. So I want to address some of these concerns head on. Because when you lay out the options, this choice isn't even close. But whether it's online or in the media or in our social circles, there are folks who say they're not sure about Kamala. They accuse her of not providing enough policy detail. Some wonder, do we really know her? Is she too aggressive? Is she not aggressive enough? There are folks sowing seeds of doubt about whether she's who she appears to be. Now, don't get me wrong. Voters have every right to ask hard questions of any candidate seeking office. But can someone tell me why we are once again holding Kamala to a higher standard than her opponent? We expect her to be intelligent and articulate, to have a clear set of policies, to never show too much anger, to prove time and time again that she belongs. But for Trump, we expect nothing at all. No understanding of policy, no ability to put together a coherent argument, no honesty, no decency, no morals. Instead, too many people are willing to write off his childish, mean-spirited antics by saying, well, Trump's just being Trump, rather than question his horrible behavior. Some folks think he's funny. And if you remember, that's exactly how he got elected the first time. Folks gave him a pass and rolled the dice, betting that he couldn't possibly be that bad. And then there were those folks who didn't think it really mattered who the president was, if you can believe that. And still others who thought it'd be a good idea just to blow up our entire democracy. Let us not forget how badly that worked out for all of us. Let us not forget the incompetence and the corruption, the chaos that was the cornerstone of his entire 4 years in office.
He is increasingly unstable. He is unwell. He is out of control. He was unfit in 2016, and he is more unfit than ever now. He is losing his mind and lashing out, which is why he said this about Michelle Obama.
Report on November 5th. You know what's nasty to me? Michelle Obama. She was, ooh. I always tried to be so nice and respectful. Oh, she opened up a little bit of a box. She opened up a little bit of something. Oh, she was nasty. Ooh. Shouldn't be that way. That was a big mistake that she made.
First of all, it would have been too far for Donald Trump to simply say that she's nasty, but the insinuation that comes with him, claiming she made a big mistake, is even more concerning. He opened up a box in him, and considering what Donald Trump has done to those he considers his enemies and what he is planning to do, as he has already mentioned, sending the military, the National Guard, locking up and deporting those he views as the enemy from within, that is a clear threat. This is an attempt to intimidate, and it should not be taken lightly, especially after what he said right here.
He said, lock her up, lock her up, lock her up. They screamed, I'd say, easy, easy, we won. We're going to have unity. I could have locked her up, but I didn't want to lock her up. She's the wife of the President of the United States previously, and she was Secretary of State. I said, that would be so terrible for our country. And then they try and do it to me. Isn't it terrible?
It was not your decision not to lock up Hillary Clinton. She didn't commit crimes, unlike you, Donald. That's the reason. But this will not be the case in a second Trump term. It won't matter what you've done. If you have crossed Donald Trump, it's over for you. That is his plan. That is the enemy. And that is the focus of Donald Trump all the time. That will be his focus if he is president. And that should terrify us, especially for the strange reasons he wants to go after people. Think of the bizarre reasons he's using to target Kamala Harris right here.
You know, she's not a nice person. Does anybody know that she is not a nice person? In case you had any ideas. Did you see she used the F word the other day? She thought she was talking without a camera on. She used the F word. Did you see that? Oh, it's terrible. If that ever happened to me, it would have been front page headlines. Oh, boy. No, they got her using the wrong word, camera. She should be admonished for doing that, don't you agree?
Donald Trump has constantly and consistently used foul language and obscenities to describe Kamala Harris. So I think letting an F-bomb slip once in a while shouldn't necessarily be considered an impeachable offense. I don't know what's wrong with him. He doesn't seem to know what he's saying. Maybe there were some problems with his teleprompter. Speaking of teleprompters, listen to what he had to say here.
Isn't it great to have a guy that doesn't need to look at a teleprompter at all, right? I don't need to.
He continues to do this bit, and it really just shows how out of touch he is. But I think it's part of his larger insecurity about his inability to read, his cognitive decline, and his constant tripping over his words. Speaking of tripping over his words, listen to what he said right here.
But we're close to World War II because we have people in the White House that World War III. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I had World War II. I had World War II. I had World War II veterans. I didn't realize the word veteran afterwards. Thank you very much.
In an attempt to fearmonger about World War III, Donald Trump claims we can't get into World War II. Clearly, he is not a student of history. Donald Trump wanted Nazi generals who were historically loyal to Hitler. Yeah, I don't think that's the reason you shouldn't want Nazi generals, Donald. Trump is not a particularly bright individual, clearly not a historian, and certainly not someone with an accurate understanding of anything, as we can see right here.
This is the kind of outrageous rhetoric that has resulted in 2 assassination attempts in the last 3 months, probably. I could say that that's probably right.
It was Democrats who got those 2 Republicans to try to come after you. No, I think it was 2 disturbed individuals who had access to weapons they shouldn't have because of Republican policies. Once again, Republicans will always put their financial gain and political interests, helping out their donors and their friends, above the lives of Americans. That's what their movement is all about. That's what Donald Trump is all about. And that's what we have to call out every single day, and we're going to do just that on this show. If you want to support that, as always, you can hit that subscribe button, leave a like on this video, and if you stuck around until the end, drop a blue heart in the comments. Until next time, I'll see you soon.